What is up, everybody? Welcome on in to the College Football Breakdown Show, Week 10. I'm going to get straight to it since it's been a very long week, a very crazy election week. I'm sure you all know. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't pulled an all-nighter since, since college. So it's been an interesting week. I'm going to get right to it, get in, get out, which by my standards probably means takes an hour. Anyway, this is brought to you by thebreakdownsports.com. We have a lovely 14-game slate. Most notably, we have the return of the Pac-12, and we had the return of the MAC. Maction was back on Wednesday. Won a few dollars there. Hopefully you caught my breakdown video. But now we have the big boys. Let's break down every game, shall we, folks? All right, first we have a matchup, USC versus Arizona State, and this is definitely a game I'm looking to target, a good one right off the bat here. If you don't know by now, USC has a very, very good offense. They are running kind of an air raid system under Graham Harrell, one of the better offensive coordinators in college football, in my opinion. And they return just about everybody, so I expect them to get even better this year. I think they're a pretty safe bet in pretty much all their games. It is their first game of the year, so have to mention that. Keaton Slovis was one of the best freshman quarterbacks I've ever seen in college football last year. His job was made easy by the system and his fantastic wide receivers, but he still has that same system and the fantastic wide receivers, so we don't need to discuss exactly how much of a pro prospect he is at this point in time, as everybody seems to want to do when you bring him up. All you need to know is he was fantastic last year, and he should be fantastic again this year. I love him at 7,800. Last year they played Arizona State, and he threw 4 touchdowns in the first quarter, ended up with 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. It seems like they kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit, but he could have done even more damage. Arizona State does not have a bad defense by any means, but the USC should be able to score here because they're going to score on pretty much anybody. Their running situation is not good, so I'm not doing their running backs. I'm super interested in their wide receivers, like more interested than any other wide receivers on the slate, especially at their prices. They are amazing. Amon-Ra St. Brown should be their top guy. Michael Pittman Jr. left to the NFL, now playing for the Colts on Sundays. And this guy St. Brown sees a ton of targets. He went for over, it was like 160 some yards and a touchdown last year when they played Arizona State. He has a very safe floor and a pretty good ceiling. Tyler Vaughns is maybe my second favorite wide receiver option on the slate at 5,700. He's more of a longer outside guy, maybe more of a deep threat, maybe more of a red zone threat, but I think they're going to see targets all over the field, and they're going to run a ton of plays, and they're going to throw a ton of passes. So these two guys are very good. I guess I have a slight preference towards St. Brown, but with Vaughns at his price point, I really think you should have either one of these guys in your lineups. Maybe you even put both with a Slovis stack, since I would honestly probably be kind of surprised if both of them don't get the 100-yard bonus and catch a touchdown. But yeah, if you don't want to play both, just pick and choose one. I prefer St. Brown. Drake London, their third wide receiver, there is absolutely 100% room for 3 fantasy-relevant wide receivers. Vaughns and St. Brown and Pittman were all super fantasy-relevant last year. London should be the third guy. He had a pretty productive year last year as the number 3. I think he's a fantastic athlete. He plays on the basketball team as well. He had a way bigger year last year than most people were expecting, because most people thought he was just kind of a raw prospect. But he's very good. He has chemistry with the quarterback, and at 5,000, that's also a very good play. As far as any fourth wide receiving options, I'm not quite sure who is going to get the start. That hasn't been quite confirmed from what I've seen. If I had to guess, it would be Brew McCoy. So they have a few really big recruits and highly touted guys. I thought it would be this guy Bryant, but he was injured. I guess he's probable now, but I'm not quite sure if he'll be at full speed. He had a pretty bad injury a couple months ago. So I think Brew McCoy, and this guy's been in and out. He's been to Texas and back, and I mean, who knows? Who knows, basically. But at 3,700, you could do worse. And another punt play. I don't like this one as much as McCoy. But Keenan Kristen, this guy's like super fast, and every now and then he catches a few out of the backfield. But they rotate like 4 running backs. So it's really impossible to tell. I would prefer McCoy. As far as Arizona State, I absolutely think you can do a game stack here. I'm not sure what to expect from USC's defense. As always, they're super talented, but they always underperform. They do have a new defensive coordinator, Todd Orlando. who has been really successful at some stops and not so successful at others. I would lean toward not successful just with the combination of USC continually underachieving and with him underachieving sometimes in the past, but I do not 100% know that for certainty. Anyway, Arizona State's offense is probably overrated. They actually were really bad last year despite having some NFL talent, and then they lose Eno Benjamin, an NFL running back, and they lose Brandon Ayuk, who we have seen making a lot of plays for the Niners on Sundays. Well, I guess they played today, Thursday. Didn't watch it, though. I heard everybody has COVID. Anyway, I do think Jaden Daniels, this guy played okay as a freshman. He honestly didn't impress me that much, but he was a freshman, and you can see that he is really talented. I would not be surprised at all if he took a big step forward. Even if he doesn't take a huge step forward, it should be a back and forth, somewhat high-scoring game, and he can run the ball a little bit. So 6,700, I do think he is fine. There is supposed to be some rain. I'm not super concerned about that, to be honest with you, but it is worth checking if you're going to play the game. I haven't seen anything about any bad winds, which is usually what I'd be worried about. Their top wide receiver, Frank Darby, I think is worth targeting. He's the only wide receiver I would look to because we don't really know what their secondary options are going to look like. Their wide receiver one options have been very good in the past, most notably N'Keal Harry and Brandon Ayuk, as mentioned earlier. I don't think Darby's quite that talent, but he might be an NFL talent, and he might see a lot of targets. And he was somewhat productive, scored a fair amount of touchdowns last year. As far as their running backs, there may be value here. Diamante Trianum is a very, very talented freshman, and he's supposed to split. He's listed as an or on the depth chart, carries with Rachaad White. Just since Rachaad White is $2,300 cheaper, I think Rachaad White is definitely in play as a punt play here. Trianum might be fine, but even Eno Benjamin wasn't like super productive last year. They had a very bad offensive line. They did not have a very great offense, and I don't know if we can expect Diamante Trianum to be better than Eno Benjamin in his first start. He doesn't necessarily have to be better than Eno Benjamin to repay his salary at $5,300, but he does need to be that good to earn way more carries than White. So I don't know if that's a given. So either one of those guys are okay. All right, West Virginia versus Texas. Letty Brown sees about 25 touches every single week in and week out, and we all know this Texas defense isn't exactly the best. I think they are slightly underrated. They had some unlucky games where they gave up a lot of points due to fumbles and weird punts and whatnot, weird special team stuff, but they still are not very good. So I definitely think Letty Brown is okay. I think there are a lot of cheap, expensive running backs this week who are okay, and he's one of them. He's fine, especially in cash, he's fine, but in tournaments, he's not a must play or anything. Jarrett, I always say this wrong, Doge, whatever it is, at 6,100, definitely has to be mentioned. I'm not a big fan of this West Virginia offense at all. I think they have a pretty good defense. I think they're a pretty good defensive team, but I'm not sure about their offense. It is worth mentioning, Texas does not have the best defense, and this guy has gone over 20 points in each of his last 3 games, so certainly he could do that here. So at 6,100, that's a very good price. As far as the wide receiving options, they really spread the ball out, and it's hard to tell who's going to go off between Wright, Ford Wheaton, and Sam James. Wright clearly looks like the best one of those guys to me, but he's not really seeing much more targets than these other 2 guys. But Wright is the guy I would stack with Daggy if I chose to go that route. All right, as far as Texas, obviously we all know Sam Ehlinger. He's still a little bit too expensive for me, and I think West Virginia has a good defense, as mentioned earlier. Ehlinger does all of his damage, or 50% of it anyway, in the fourth quarter or in overtime, and that just doesn't quite seem sustainable to me, especially at that price point. He's still great, but just at that price, I don't know. As far as the running backs, Keontae Ingram, it looks like he has been downgraded to out. So Bijan Robinson at 4,500 is a very good play, in my opinion. 5-star running back. Kids looked very impressive to me. He hasn't had a huge game, but he has been productive with the carries he has been getting. As you can see, his game log there, consistently averaging about 5 yards a carry. So I think he is fine. Again, West Virginia has a decent defense, but it's good for the price. And then Roschon Johnson behind him, I would not be surprised if he scored a touchdown at 4,100. As far as the pass catchers go, Moore is super hard to tell. He came out of the gates on fire, and he has just been a dud lately. So until he turns around, I am not going to play him. I think Jake Smith is the guy I would target here. I'll probably have some Jake Smith ownership. He's at 5,000. That's too cheap. He is Sam Ehlinger's top option, it looks like, going forward. He's finally healthy, and their slot option is usually the best option on this Texas team. He saw 10 targets last game. He's been productive in 2 out of the 3 games he's played. He was injured to start the year, and in one of the games that he did play, I don't think he was injured. I don't think he was fully healthy. I mean, he was a game-time decision. He finally got healthy last week, had 7 catches on 10 targets for 70 yards and a touchdown. So I think Jake Smith is fine here, and I think Brennan Eagles is too cheap at 4,100. I don't like Brennan Eagles. I don't think he's great. He drops more passes than anyone I've ever seen, but it's hard to deny that he has a decent role in this good offense. And 4,100, that's just too cheap in general, so he's okay. My interest stops there in that game. All right, UNC versus Duke. This is one you should probably be looking at because there should be some points here. There have been a lot of points in pretty much all of North Carolina's games this year. The total is at 63, and that's been going up. Might go up further. So I can't talk you off anyone on UNC. It's hard for me to pick and choose exactly who to pick, so I don't really have much advice other than everybody is fine. Sam Howell's fine. De'Ami Brown is fine. They still don't throw the ball quite as much as I would like to see to play one of these guys, but De'Ami Brown has been super, super efficient with the targets he has been getting, and their other outside guy, Bo Corrales, is out. We saw what he did last week with Bo Corrales out, 240 yards for 56 fantasy points, 3 touchdowns, 11 receptions. So I think De'Ami Brown and Sam Howell are clearly in play. Javonte Williams, I don't love him at his price point at 8,500, but he has already scored 13 touchdowns this year, so hard to tell you no. I do think Michael Carter, their other running back, provides value at 6,300. I still think he's a little bit more efficient everywhere except the red zone, but Javonte Williams breaks like 4 million tackles every game. So Daz Newsome is dead to me. He's worth noting at 4,000. There's probably value there, but he's dead to me. So you're talking to the wrong guy. You're going to the wrong guy for fantasy advice if you want me to keep telling you to play Daz Newsome. I've done too much of that here. As I mentioned, Bo Corrales is out, opening up the door for somebody else to step up, but nobody else has really stepped up yet. Josh Downs might soon. This guy is super electric. I love watching him, but he is a freshman, and we can see he has done pretty much nothing except catching a touchdown. 1 single touchdown on 2 catches. I think Khafre Brown, De'Ami Brown's brother, I think this guy's great. Again, he caught a 76-yard touchdown. I remember I was watching the condensed game, and I'm like, oh, Khafre Brown must have gone off this game because I was barely halfway paying attention. And I saw him on that run. He's extremely, extremely impressive. And then I go and check the box score, and he has 1 catch all game. So, again, the targets aren't quite there, but the talent is, the opportunity is, and at 3,800, the price is certainly there as well. So I don't hate Khafre Brown at 3,800. If you're sick of playing Daz Newsome, maybe try Khafre Brown. All right, Duke. Duke is, I don't know how to put this nicely. They're just kind of an ugly team, but they're playing a bad defense, and their guys are super cheap. I think they rotate these running backs too much for me to be interested in. Deion Jackson, I think, is clearly the guy you would rather have, but it's hard to know whether he's going to get 28 carries or whether he's going to get 10, as I think he did last week. Chase Bryce just throws a lot of picks and hasn't been very good at all. I thought he would be better. 6 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Didn't see that till now. That's ugly. Never mind. I can't recommend him at that price point, but he's playing bad defense, I guess, and he's cheap. The wide receiving options, they spread the ball out a lot. I'm not really going to go over that because they all have very similar target shares. Their best offensive player is their tight end, Noah Gray. Week in and week out, he's been too cheap. He is coming off 2 straight duds, but before that, he was extremely consistent with 10 points or more in all of his games. So at 4,100, he is another okay, cheap option. But overall, not super interested in Duke. I could see where a game stack would have some value if you're playing a lot of lineups. Maybe throw 1 in there with Duke if you're playing 150 or, yeah, at least 1. Michigan, Indiana. This is not a game I have a lot of ownership interest in. You might look at Indiana's game log and see that they have been scoring a lot of points. They scored a lot of points against Penn State, and then they scored a lot of points against Rutgers, with a caveat. One of those games versus Penn State went to overtime. They had less than 300 yards in that game, and 100 of those yards were in the fourth quarter, on their very last drive in the fourth quarter and in overtime. They had 100 yards. So I played them versus Rutgers, and they were good to me against Rutgers, and thank you, Indiana. But it's all about matchups in college football at DFS. While Michigan's defense was bad last week against Michigan State, they allowed 27 points. So I don't really see how Indiana would score a lot more than that. So not super interested in Indiana this week. I think just play them in a good matchup. Stevie Scott still sees a ton of carries, but I think Michigan's run D is better than their pass D. So Steve Scott, maybe. A lot of carries. Been very consistent. And Michael Penix, I want to see the efficiency before I play him in anything other than a cupcake matchup against Rutgers. But thank you for last week. You the man. As far as the wide receivers, Whop Philyor. So surprisingly, I think Ty Freifogel has more targets on the year at 4,300 than Philyor does at 5,800. Now, Philyor has gotten more yards and he has gotten the touchdowns. He has been better, and I think he is the better player. But anytime you see a 1,500 price point different and the guy below him has been somewhat productive in his career and has been getting more targets, Ty Freifogel has to be shouted out at that 4.3 price range, especially against Michigan, where we saw, was it Ricky White, their third wide receiver, go bananas for 196 yards and a touchdown. Maybe a secondary receiver goes bananas here. Maybe that's just kind of a game plan thing with Michigan corners. I haven't watched enough game tape to know exactly what the deal was there. But, Rocky Lombardi and Ricky White, if they're destroying you through the air, then anybody can have a productive game. So, sure, maybe Freifogel. I think Philyor's fine. He's okay. Peyton Hendershot, the tight end, I also played him last week. Stacked him with Penix because he was 3.6K, and that was great. He's a very good tight end. So at 4.6K, he's $1,000 more expensive. He's whatever. He's fine, but yeah, that's it. Oh, I forgot Michigan. Not interested in Michigan. They split carries between their running backs. Joe Milton has an absolute bazooka, but I'm not sure he's a very good quarterback until he shows me that against anyone other than a Minnesota team that looks like they have the worst defense of all time, allowing 9.5 yards per play on the season. We'll get to them later. They're on the slate. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent here somewhere. Indiana has a fine defense. I think Ronnie Bell is their top wide receiving option, but they keep giving random guys a bunch of targets, like Eric All is their target leader, and he's done absolutely nothing with them all season. It's a Harbaugh team. They're ugly. But Ronnie Bell is their best receiver at 5,000. Speaking of ugly, Michigan State versus Iowa. Very low game total. I'm not interested in this game, but there are some good wide receiver options that may be as a one-off. Jaden Reed is very talented at 5,900. Ricky White went bazooka, ballistic. Got to check my arsenal at 5,000. But I think Jalen Naylor at 4,700 might end the season as their top wide receiver. I don't know if that's crazy to say, but he had a very good game last week. I advised him as my favorite wide receiver option on the team. Oh, I guess he only went for 268. Tried to say I had a good call. Did not. Ricky White had a much better game. But anyway, he's been fine in both the games he's played, and he's a pretty good wide receiver. But yeah, this has a low game total, unless you're being super contrarian. If you are, play one of those wide receivers from Michigan State. Rocky Lombardi, their quarterback, is not good. Even though he's had two good games so far, he's not good. Okay, as far as Iowa, their running back, Tyler Goodson. I'm a big Tyler Goodson fan, so I might be a little biased. He's been fine to start the year, but not exactly fantastic. He's probably going to have a few big games later on. I'm pretty sure of that, and he does catch some passes out of the backfield, so you could do worse here. At 6,100, I think he's fine. Spencer Petras, their quarterback, hasn't really impressed me at 5,800. That's probably a little bit too cheap, seeing as he threw 50 passes last game. He has gone over 200 yards in each of his game, but he hasn't been very good. He has not been very effective at all, not efficient. 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions through 2 games. So, yikes. Their most talented wide receiving option, probably their most, maybe their most talented guy on the whole roster, Amir Smith-Marset, is out for this game, having some legal troubles. Forget exactly what he did. And that leaves 2 guys. Brandon Smith is pretty talented at 5,100. He hasn't really done anything this year. I guess he's caught a touchdown. 6 points, 10. Could do worse. But he is pretty talented, and if they're throwing the ball as much as they did last game, which I'm not sure they will, but he's worth mentioning. He gets a bump with Smith-Marset out. I think they're... Where'd you go? They're tight end. Sam Laporta. Tight end you, Iowa. Sam Laporta's the next guy up. Leads the team in targets. Has been decent. Look at that. 571, 646. No touchdowns yet. That's changing soon, especially with their most dangerous option out. So, Sam Laporta at 4.2 is okay. Definitely okay. All right, let's get away from that game. Florida, Georgia. This one, tough one to talk about. Tough one to call. Very good game. Mostly going to be watching this one. Not much ownership interest. Stetson Bennett stinks. I'm not going to spend time on Stetson Bennett. He's a joke. They should play JT Daniels if he's healthy at all, which it sounds like he is, but we haven't gotten any word. JT Daniels can actually throw the ball downfield. Former 5-star, has played in the air raid with USC, and he has a decent arm. Anyway, he can actually throw the ball, and Florida's defense has been beatable this year. So if he starts 5,700, that's fine, but no guarantees. No interest in the wide receiving options. I played this guy Burton, very talented. I don't know if he's a freshman, newbie anyway, new face, and he was super cheap in that Bama game, and he was pretty nice. Yeah, 3.2K, but the volume's just not there. Pickens is questionable. Pickens will have a big game eventually, but until I see it, not really interested. Where I would have interest is at the running back position. They have not been able to run the ball very well this year, except in a few spots, like later on in that Tennessee game, if I remember correctly, and last week they were okay against Kentucky, but they scored 14 points. But they could run the ball at least. So Zamir White at 7.2K, you can run on this Florida team. I think they're giving up about 130 yards on the ground per game. Coming off a 26 carry, 136 for 1 touchdown game, has gone over 10 points. It looks like in every single week, has gone over 15 points in 3 of his 5 games, has gone over 20 points twice. He is their clear focal point of this offense, especially if Stetson Bennett's in the ball game, because that fool can't throw the dang rock. And when he does, it gets picked off. So Zamir White, yeah, he's fine. Florida, not playing Florida this week. You can, if you want to. They've been very good so far this year. I think a lot of that's at least a little bit fluky. I want to give them their due because I like Kyle Trask and I like watching this team. But they're playing Georgia, who has I'll just go with one of. They have a top 3 defense in the league. I'll leave it there. Very good defense. So Tony at 7.8K. Tony's the kind of guy, very, very fun to watch, will break some long touchdowns when given the opportunities, especially when playing a team that isn't very good at tackling, just not very good defensively. That's when you want to play Tony. But at 7.8K, way too expensive. Doesn't really see in a million targets. Not a traditional wide receiving threat. Kind of a gadgety, very, very good on screen. I don't want to take anything away from Tony. He's awesome, but it's not somebody you want to play 7.8K against a very, very good Georgia defense. I guess it's worth mentioning Georgia has a bunch of injuries and weird stuff going on in their defense, so maybe not quite as elite as they would otherwise be. Anyway, where I'm trying to go with this. Why does Emory Jones have an urgent note? That's interesting. Rushed once for 7 yards. Boy, that was urgent. I'm glad I read that. Anyway, Kyle Pitts is too cheap. He was way too expensive for most of the year. Now he's at 6.2K. I like that price. He sees 8 targets every single week. He's the kind of guy I would target in a matchup against Georgia because I know he's going to see 8 targets, and he's kind of matchup proof. So, yeah, I think Pitts is fine, and they can't run the ball. and not interested in their secondary options, receiving options. All right, Kansas versus Oklahoma. Kansas's defense is allowing over 40 points per game. They stink. Oklahoma's going to score a lot of points. They scored 62 last week. They might get close to that here. The only reason I wouldn't play Rattler, why I might not play Rattler all that much, I'm still going to play him some, is they might just blow the brakes off of Kansas. I mean, they are going to blow the brakes off Kansas, let's be honest. So it's just how much do they throw the ball. He's still probably going to get over 20 points, we see here. But in the games where he's been most productive, it's been like Texas, Iowa State, the closer games where they're actually throwing. TCU, he did okay, but the game got out of hand. Texas Tech did okay, but the game got out of hand. And this game is going to get out of hand. Now he could throw 4 touchdowns in the first quarter. That can happen. But yeah, just have that in mind. As far as their wide receiver options, Rambo is still out. So Marvin Mims has kind of taken over as the number 1 guy. But the target volume hasn't really been there. He's been very good. So 6.8K is fine. But he's not really someone... I mean, they still spread the ball out a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if they're spreading the ball out a lot, and you have one guy who's about $2,000 more expensive than the other receiving options, it's very hard for me to justify paying up for you. Against Kansas, of course, he could just break 3 long touchdowns. Nobody would be that surprised. Theo Weiss has been getting better and better as the season's gone on at 4.9K. I'm interested in him. Played him last week. Had 100 yards, no touchdown, but has gone over 10 fantasy points in each of his last 3 games, and has been getting better. We see he has about 250 yards, about there, 240 or so in his last 3 games, and 5-star kid, very talented. 4.9K, that's too cheap against Kansas. Stogner, their tight end, 4.6, might catch a touchdown, but I really prefer Weiss as my preferred option. Running back, one of my favorite running backs on the slate, Ramondre Stevenson, returned from suspension last week, had 13 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown. He is their most talented running back. This Oklahoma offense is best when they can really pound the ball on the ground, when they have a nice bruising running back, and they can just really run for 6 yards a clip or more, and then they also have the super talented quarterback to beat you over the top, and they kind of seem to have that getting together. They've been lacking that running back. Pledger was fine, McGowan was fine, but Stevenson just kind of clearly seems like the best back, and he adds a physical element they didn't really have, and we saw that immediately last week. So he was playing Kansas, and he's 6.9K. Of course, he could get a couple touchdowns. I think that's fine. These other running backs, they could also return value because they're playing Kansas, but I would go with Stevenson. I think he definitely has the more upside. I think he's their best running back. All right, Kansas, if you want to get super crazy and play these guys as a one-off, their running back's cheap, Gardner, but people were expecting more out of him than he can give. Their offense has been really bad, so even though they're playing Oklahoma, I don't know, their quarterback's 4.7K, and he can run a little bit, freshman, on the road against Oklahoma, though. And as always, a decent one-off if you really need wide receiving options. I usually mention this guy, Kwame Lassiter II, their best wide receiver, 4.2K, and then Parchment at 3.7K. Those guys are fine, either one. If you really need salary savers, I think they're okay. They don't excite me at all, but they're going to be playing from behind and probably throwing the ball a lot. All right, Texas Tech versus TCU. I am interested in this game, as you should always be when Texas Tech is playing one of the worst defenses in college football, allowing 1 million points per game. Coming off of getting embarrassed by Oklahoma, giving up 62 points. Been getting embarrassed for how many years now defensively. It's going to take a while to fix. I think especially the way Kingsbury was recruiting and how the program as a whole has been recruiting, you can't fix that defense anytime soon, and we see that. And they've played 6 games, so it's not like the smallest sample size. Their program history is their sample size. Anyway, enough low blows. Max Duggan at 6.4K. I always wait for Max Duggan's price point to drop and for him to be playing a crappy team. I did that a few times last year. His prices were cheaper last year because he was worse last year than he is this year, quite frankly. But this guy is a big kid who can run the ball. So yeah, I played him against Texas. He had 28 points because he was cheap. He was 5.8K. Then look at this. His price goes up. 6.3 jump, 6.8K. He's not worth 7.3. He's worth 6.4. But when he's playing a bad defense, that's where the value is, because he can just take off and run, and he's better than the defense. He's going to be better than Texas Tech's defense here at 6.4K. I really like Max Duggan. As far as stacking him, I don't really play TCU wide receivers. I just kind of play Duggan as a one-off because I think if he has a very big game, it's probably mostly due to his rushing. Tay Barber and Johnston are their top wide receivers, but they still only see like 5 targets a game, it seems like. So Johnston's coming on a little bit more. I think he's a freshman. He's a young kid, and more of a deep threat. So probably more upside, and I guess he's got a decent floor as well. So I like him. He's coming on pretty strong. Looks like a talented guy. Running backs. The running back room has been a complete and utter mess all year long, but they had a good rushing performance last week against Baylor, who actually I think has a pretty good defense. So that was surprising. Maybe they're coming to life. And now they're playing Texas Tech. Zach Evans, mega recruit, 5-star. Waited forever to make his decision. Finally chose TCU. Then wasn't really practicing over the summer. I forget exactly what happened, but he wasn't able to practice. They brought him on very slowly. He was like 6th on the depth chart, it seemed like. And then he finally gets 7 carries last week, and look what he does. 81 yards. Week before that, 5 receptions, 56 yards. Extremely efficient. Kid looks very good. Seems like he's getting more carries. 4,000 going against Texas Tech. Not a bad GPP play there, folks. A little bit more on the safer side because he did see 16 carries to Evans 7 last week, and he was productive as well, 117 yards. I think Barlow is fine. Had a bad game against Oklahoma, but otherwise had 10 points before that. He's okay. Probably doesn't see like a million carries, but if they really beat up Texas Tech, maybe. They have a pretty high implied total, so I don't hate that. But yeah, prioritizing Duggan. I like Evans. Barlow's okay. In general, they're a strong team with those wide receiving options as well. All right, Texas Tech. Not very interested in them this week. Why? They can't figure out who their quarterback is. They can't figure out what wide receivers are playing. They had like 1 million of them out last time they played. I don't know who's coming back. I guess everybody's coming back, and now the targets are all a mess. I think I'm just going to completely avoid them here. I guess there's some value. But, yeah, I'm completely avoiding them. Only thing I have any bit of interest in is Sir Roderick Thompson, their running back at 6,000. I just think that's a little cheap. TCU's defense is not bad, but not quite as good as they have been in the past. But I almost never play Sir Roderick Thompson. He's always way too expensive. He had some really big games to start the year against a cupcake schedule, and then since the schedule has gotten harder, he hasn't been good at all. So I don't love him, but he's always liable to score a few touchdowns. All right, Minnesota versus Illinois. Let's talk about Illinois here. They're playing a Minnesota defense that's allowing 9.5 yards per play. 9.5 yards per play. So a first down pretty much every single snap. We knew they were going to drop off defensively this year. We didn't know they were going to have COVID troubles. PJ Fleck has been super tight-lipped about what exactly is going on with their COVID situation. We think they were missing about 19 guys last week when they got embarrassed by a bad Maryland team. But quite frankly, it just seems like the defense did not look normal to me. It has not looked normal this year. And there's a 21-day quarantine period for Big Ten. With PJ Fleck being tight-lipped and not giving any information, we don't know who's going to be back. We don't even know who was out in the first place. Well, at least I don't. I haven't been following Minnesota. Maybe if you go read all their beat writing stuff. Haven't had time to this week. You can find more out about that. Long story short, they do not look normal. And they've been terrible, allowing over 40 points per game. So Illinois is in play here. Illinois has also had COVID troubles, and they're down to, I believe this is their 4th string quarterback, Corin Taylor. Actually, I thought I heard Williams wasn't playing, but he's listed as questionable. Will not play versus Purdue. I don't think he's playing, but I would check, because if he does play, I think he's a better option. He can run. But anyway, Corin Taylor going against a terrible defense, a 4.5K minimum price. absolutely has to be in consideration. Doesn't mean you absolutely have to play him, but you have to consider him. He played last week, had 18 points, looked okay, didn't look great. He did have 17 rushing attempts, which is very good. He can take off and scoot. We saw what a quarterback could do, who could take off and scoot when Baby Tua went off last week. I don't think he's as good as Baby Tua, but I also don't think Baby Tua is super amazing. So anyway, 4.5, that's a very strong option. I will have interest in Illinois one way or the other. A full Illinois stack is pretty insane. Maybe if you play a lot of lineups, actually you could do a lot more insane things with how bad this Minnesota defense has been. But anyway, guy I'm most interested in is the running back Mike Epstein, 4.6K. This guy's had a ton of injuries in his career, but he is very talented. He did have about 70 rushing yards and a touchdown last week, 63. Going against this Minnesota rush defense that has been absolutely abysmal. They made Jake Funk. Look like Christian McCaffrey, pretty much, last week. So I think Epstein's better than Jake Funk. I don't know, maybe not. Okay, as far as the wide receivers, Hightower is okay. I don't really trust him. I don't think he sees enough target shares, but he's decent at 4.6. They made a mistake in pricing, or I think they did. They mixed up these Immortal Baby is what we like to call him, especially if we're butchering his name. The Immortal Baby and his brother, the Immortal Baby Bros. I think that's his brother anyway. I think they switched these prices up because Josh is better. Daniel's a tight end, doesn't see a whole lot of volume. He did catch a tight end, and he is a decent player. Transfer from USC, I believe. Yeah, 43 yards and a touchdown. But Immortal Baby was their top wide receiving option going into the year. This guy's an NFL prospect, has a huge body, super talented. At 4.2K, that's way too cheap going against this bad Minnesota team. And the pricing is flipped. Something is up. So even without the pricing point, I would be interested in him. So clearly interested in him. All right, on the Minnesota side of things, they haven't really been throwing the ball that much. They've been pounding the ball on the ground with Ibrahim. He's too expensive at 10K. I'm not paying up. He's fine. He's been going absolutely ballistic. Maybe in cash, but 10K, that's too expensive. What are you doing? Illinois' rush defense has actually held opponents to 3.1 yards per carry on the year, and they have played some decent teams. I mean, they played Wisconsin. So I think the rush defense is probably the strength of this defensive unit, but they've had a very, very, very poor pass defense near the bottom of all of college football. So I think Rashad Bateman, who has not had a huge game yet, at 7,000, there's a lot of expensive wide receiving options, and they're all fine. Bateman's a little bit cheaper than some of them, like Dotson's at 8.3. I think Bateman has a big game here. I like Bateman. I think he has a chance at having a big game. He's been fine. I mean, pretty good by most people's standards, but it was a little disappointing last week against Maryland for sure. I think he could have a big game here. I really do. I think they'll throw the ball more than they have been because they've just been pounding the ball. So I like Bateman. I think Ottman Bell, their secondary wide receiver, played a lot of him in the, Thursday night slate, Friday night slate, whenever they played. And he was good, 24 points. He's a good player. Hasn't been seeing very much volume, which definitely does caution me here. But at 5,000, NFL player going against Illinois, bad pass defense, mildly interesting. I'm not playing Maryland against Penn State. I think Maryland's offensive explosion last week was a little bit fluky. I am interested. I want to watch them going forward, but I think they'll mostly have more bad games than they do good games. Could be wrong. I'm going to watch them. But I have no interest in any of their guys going against a good Penn State defense. Jahan Dotson. So let's look at Penn State here. Sean Clifford does like to run the ball, and he could be okay at 8.9K. Maryland's defense really stinks. And Clifford could run. It's kind of crazy paying up for Clifford at 8.9K, so I probably won't do that. But I think he's fine. Jahan Dotson had an absolutely amazing week last week. Go watch his highlights against Ohio State. Just phenomenal. And he's been going ballistic, so it's hard for me to talk you out of off of him because he's clearly the number one wide receiving option. So he's okay. Maybe a little bit too expensive for me, but I think it's for a good reason. I don't know if he deserves to be the most expensive guy, but after you just did what he did to Ohio State, I'm not going to knock it too much. Pat Freiermuth, one of the better tight ends in all of college football at 4.7K. He's decent, has been productive somewhat to start the year, so he's fine. Okay, bearing the lead. One of my favorite running backs on this slate, probably where I'll start my lineups, Devin Ford. We all know these Penn State running backs, right? I'm not saying Devin Ford is Saquon Barkley or Miles Sanders or what have you, but he's the next guy up. They had like a four-headed monster going into the year, and I think one of them opted out, one of them transferred, and one of them got hurt, I believe. I have that correct. So Devin Ford is now the guy stepping in. Didn't do anything with his opportunities so far. Well, he played Ohio State in one of those games. And now he's playing a Maryland defense that has been extremely beatable on the run. They were the ones who just let Mohamed Ibrahim go crazy. They're the reason why Ibrahim is priced at $10,000. So Devin Ford, love him at 5.9K. Love him. They're going to run the ball at will. They're 25-point favorites. Maryland's defense is not good. Love Devin Ford. Let's mention their secondary running back options. Like I mentioned, a lot of people got injured. Last week, I believe he was the only running back to get even a single carry. We know that's not what Penn State likes to do. Penn State has never done that. They always like to rotate their running backs, and they have 2 5-star running backs here. I think it's Lee and Holmes. Anyway, Lee and Holmes are the guys who should be number 2 and 3 on the depth chart. So they're completely opposite game script of last week against Ohio State, where they were throwing to try to get back in the ballgame. Completely opposite. So they shouldn't see 0 carries. These guys are going to be on the field. They are going to see carries. They even saw a couple carries in the first game before the injury to Noah Cain. These guys will see carries, 3.9K, and at 3K, very good values, very good punts. Like I said, I'm probably playing Ford. Maybe I'll play another one of these guys too as a punt in some lineups. Don't see why not. Because I have Holmes at 3,000. I mean, he's the cheapest one, so maybe I'll just play him. He had 5 carries in the first week, and Kayvon Lee had 6. So he was more productive and also had 2 receptions. So maybe Lee at 3.9K. Maybe I should just pay the extra 900. But either one's fine. I won't talk you off of either one of these guys. Okay. Moving on. Houston versus CINCY. CINCY's been very good, and Houston does not have a very good defense. So Houston has been especially beatable by the ground. So I think Jared Dokes at 6.7K is too cheap. I think it could have a decent day. He just didn't get the touchdowns last week. I played Dokes, was pretty upset about it, but it went to garbage time, and then Jerome Ford stole 2 touchdowns. So Dokes is still getting a lot more carries. So I like Dokes at 6.7K. I think Ritter's too expensive at 8.7K, but he's looked like a new quarterback. They've been really spreading the ball out to beat teams. I think they knew that was their plan of attack against, who was it? I think SMU and Memphis, their last 2 games, just right from the get-go, like spreading them out 4 wide, which was not typically something we see from Cincinnati. Usually they kind of protect their quarterback, especially Ritter last year. Looked like they just were kind of scared to push the ball, and Ritter wasn't making plays. This year it's been opposite. Ritter has looked like a brand new quarterback, and he is a dual threat. And Houston does have a very beatable defense, and they do play at a fast pace. So you can do worse than Ritter. I mean, look at that, 47 points and 37 points in the last 2 games. And they're playing it similar. Houston's kind of similar to SMU and Memphis from a play style and whatnot perspective. But it's still hard for me to play Ritter at 8.7. I'm going to be honest. I don't know how much I'm going to do of it just because I've seen too many duds from him. So maybe. I don't play Cincy wide receivers. I don't do it. Clayton Tune's been terrible. The Houston quarterback, 7.1K, going against a good Cincinnati defense. No way. It is worth noting that Marcus Stevenson should miss this game at 7.9K. Unlikely to play. He's their clear number 1 wide receiver option, so that might prevent a little bit of value in their secondary wide receiver options. Keith Corbin, 5.5K, always liable to take one in the house. However, these guys, Dell and Bradley, stepped up in Stevenson's absence last week, and they both had 10 targets, and they're both very cheap. So I think you could play either one of these guys. I think Bradley's been more productive, and he's cheaper. So I like him. Dell, I think, just got like one more touchdown. That's why he has more points. But a lot of people think Dell is pretty good, and I think he's a burner. He's pretty fun to watch. So either one of those guys are fine. If they see 10 targets like they did last week, and you get them at 4.5K or 4K, why not? All right, Utah versus Arizona. Arizona does not have a good defense, so you could look to Utah. Thing is, we don't really know what's going on with Utah. They lost like everything on offense, everything on defense. Usually they're more of a running attack. I think they might be more of a passing attack this year, but it's hard to say. Last I checked, they haven't named a starter. I'm assuming it's going to be Jake Bentley, the South Carolina transfer. Could have a bigger year than most people are expecting. They have one of the better tight ends in all of college football, Brant Keithy. He also sees some rushing touchdowns as well. This guy's fantastic at 5K. I think that's a pretty good price. Arizona's really struggles in the linebacking core, especially. So if Keithy gets a linebacker matched up on him, or if he catches a short one, these guys try to tackle him, and he's going to run him over. I think he could have a pretty good game. I'll probably own some of him at 5K. They spread the ball out to their wide receivers. Hard to know. I thought it was worth mentioning Britton Covey. This guy is back from whatever you call it, the Mission, Church of Latter-day Saint, whatever they do. The Mission, I think, is what they call it. But he's back, 4.3K. He's just, last we saw him play, he saw a lot of targets, and he got a lot of like jet sweeps and whatnot. He wasn't really a big play threat at all, but at 4.3K, especially in cash, catch a few passes, maybe. All right, running backs, they haven't really named a starter between Wilmore and Brumfield. Last I checked, I think they're probably going to split carries to start. So I wouldn't expect a Zach Moss performance, but they are too cheap, and they are playing a bad Arizona defense. So you could just plug and play, or I don't know, maybe I'll read some more and see if I find anything about who's expected to see more carries. But last I saw, it was just a complete deadlock, so I don't really have anything to add. All right, Arizona. I have mild interest in their quarterback, Grant Gunnell, because he's too cheap. Normally, you would see them going against a Utah defense, and you would think, why would I play anybody on Arizona? Well, that might make sense. However, when you start to think about it, Utah lost everything on defense. I think they had, 3 guys drafted from their secondary? They're all gone. They only returned one guy who saw more than 50 snaps in all of their secondary. I think it's going to be a step back for their defense. However, it's still Utah. They're probably still going to have a good defense. But Grant Gunnell was really effective. PFF especially loved him. I think he's a better fit for this offense, Kevin Sumlin offense, than Khalil Tate was, who was a disaster. Gunnell was much better, more of a pocket passer. We can't see his game logs from last year. But, I think Gunnell at 5.9, if you want to pay down, you could do a lot worse. Wide receiving options, I think they spread the ball out too much. I'm not super interested. If I do play, maybe it's the punt. Booby Curry, guy did nothing as a freshman last year, but he was a pretty highly talented player, and he is listed as a starter on the depth chart at 3.3K. Moving on, this might be our last game. Kansas State, Oklahoma. No interest. Game has a total of something like 46, very low. Will Howard at 5.6K is cheap for a quarterback, but he has been pretty bad. Deuce Vaughn remains to be a little bit too expensive. No interest for me. And Oklahoma State, they're more expensive this week. I played them last week. I had some Sanders-Wallace stacks that were very good to me. But they're a little more expensive this week. I still think Wallace is fine. Sanders is fine, but a little bit too expensive. Not sure I'll get there. Chuba Hubbard, I don't know if I'm interested in playing Chuba Hubbard currently. He just doesn't quite look the same, and this offense doesn't quite look the same. He does see over 20 carries every single week, and he has been very consistent, putting up about 20 fantasy points every single game, 100 yards in every single game except for the last one. But he's just not quite Chuba Hubbard. He's good. He's okay. In Kansas State, you can really beat him on the ground, so he probably has a decent game. I'm not sure I'm going to play him this week, but I wouldn't hate if you did play him, I guess is what I'll say. He's been very consistent. In Kansas State might just cure all ills. They're looking somewhat fluky, especially on a defensive side of the ball. All right, that's all I had for a game preview. As far as a positional overview, I'm not going to really pay up for quarterbacks. Like I said, Clifford and Ritter are in a pretty similar boat where they don't usually see a ton of volume, but they could. Ritter's been seeing more lately, and they can both run the ball, and they're both playing bad defenses. Rattler is fine, but like I mentioned, worry about the blowout. I think Howell and Slovis are fine. I'll probably own a fair amount of Slovis because he has cheap stacking options. Not really interested in anyone immediately below that. Where I would be interested in is, like I mentioned, Max Duggan at 6.4K. I think Dogie at 6.1. Sorry, buddy, butchering the name. At 5.9K. Ganell, maybe if I'm paying down, it's probably for Ganell. And then it's going to be hard to find my guy. But that Illinois quarterback, what's your name? Show yourself. Taylor at 4.5K. As far as the running backs, like I mentioned, these guys up here are fine, but don't really love them. Zamir White's fine. I'm probably going to play a lot of Stevenson at 6.9, a ton of Devin Ford at 5.9K. Keep in mind, when I say this, the general purpose of this video is just give you information that'll help you in DFS. I give out who I'm playing. And who I like, but that's not necessarily like the end all be all. Like, I'm mostly just trying to help you and provide you with information when you're setting your lineups. But anyway, if you're curious in who I'm find value on, again, Scott's fine at 6.5K, but Goodson 6.1K, yeah. It looks like I'm not going to be having as many running backs as normal. Barlow 5.4, maybe Trainum 5.3, maybe the Utah guys, maybe, but very difficult to call, so I'll probably lay off. Deion Jackson, maybe. Bijan Robinson at 4.5K, yes sir. Mike Epstein at 4.6K, absolutely. And Zach Evans at 4K is a very interesting GPP consideration. As far as wide receivers, like I said, can't really go wrong with Dotson or Wallace. Not sure how much I'll have of them because of the price. Not going to own Tony personally. De'Ami Brown is fine. Would love to see more target volume, but after that monster game, hard to argue. Rashad Bateman, I will play Rashad Bateman. Marvin Mims could go off, maybe a GPP guy. St. Brown is fine in any format. I'll have a ton of St. Brown. Pitts is a maybe. Decent price on Pitts. If you want to play Pitts, you're getting a good price. Vaughn's absolutely. Darby, pretty good option. And Kaifi, Jake Smith, London, Ottman Bell. The 5,000 range is a pretty good one. Weiss, 4.9K. Yeah, I'm not going to go over every single play. Okay, that wraps it up. I haven't been giving out bets just because I haven't had enough time. There's a lot of slates and been busy, so I might post bets on Twitter if that's what you're interested in. But I've been doing better in DFS than bets anyway, so that's kind of a secondary thing if you're wondering where those went. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. As always, YonkersCFB on Twitter. Post that in a little overlay, and it'll be in the description to this video. I'll timestamp everything. Also, give us a follow on thebreakdownsports.com. We recently had to kick off a new Twitter, long story, but I'll post a link down there as well. I'll have a CFF article that should be posting shortly, so I'll post that in the link as well. Probably get some more in-depth thoughts. A lot of that stuff I use in this video, but a lot of it I forget to mention or what have you. I can go into a little more depth. I usually post CFF notes on Twitter as well, but it kind of just has been too much for me lately with the video, with Twitter, and with the article. So I'm kind of trying to combine those that thread on Twitter, the CFF notes, with my article. So instead of usually in my article, I just give you a few of my favorite plays and speak in depth on them. This time I'm kind of merging that with my CFF notes, where I mention more games, I mention possible game stacks, and I mention my thoughts on just pretty much everything on the main slate. So my article will be more of my Twitter note thread, and I'm no longer going to do a Twitter note thread, just kind of merging them. So that'll be on thebreakdownsports.com. I'll post that article on Twitter. I'll link it here. Tune in. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Have a very nice weekend. Let's watch some football and get nice and drunk and eat some hot dogs and burgers or what have you. Do some barbecuing, whatever you folks like to do when you relax. Adios.